I knew something was wrong before I ever saw the pipe. That was the part that bothered me later. My gut figured it out before my eyes did. We hadn't had rain in almost a week, the kind of dry stretch where the grass starts turning pale and the dirt along the driveway gets that powdery look every truck kicks up behind it. But one strip of my lower pasture was soaked clear through like somebody had run a garden hose across it all night and forgotten to turn it off. That strip cut through the grass in one long, crooked line, darker than everything around it, glistening in the afternoon sun. And for whatever reason, I followed it. My name's Wade Mercer. I've got a little over 6 acres outside Brook Hollow, Tennessee, maybe 15 minutes from town if traffic's light, and nobody's hauling equipment on County Road 8. It's not some giant ranch or anything fancy. Just a simple white farmhouse near the rise, an old red barn I patched up myself, and open ground rolling downhill toward a tree line. Quiet most days. Exactly how I like it. About 8 months before all this started, a developer bought the ridge above me. Used to belong to a retired couple named the Pritchetts. Sweet people. Kept horses. Then they sold out and moved to North Carolina to be near their grandkids. 3 weeks later, the bulldozers showed up. By summer, there were framed houses up there with fresh siding, concrete driveways, landscaping crews laying sod like they were carpeting the whole hillside. Everything looked polished. Expensive. And every bit of it sat higher than my land. I walked that wet trail uphill until I hit the fence line. That's where I saw it. A white PVC drainage pipe sticking out from under their fence at an angle, aimed straight toward my pasture like somebody sighted it in on purpose. Water trickled from it steady and clean, not blasting, not loud, just constant. Like a faucet left barely cracked open. No rain. No storm. Still running. I stood there a second just staring at it. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes when something's got enough nerve, laughing's the only thing your body knows how to do. I got in my truck and drove up to the temporary sales office they had parked near the entrance. Air conditioner blasting. Fresh cookies on the counter. Big smiling brochure pictures of the summit at Brook Hollow. Inside was a man named Trevor Klein. Pressed polo shirt. Clean boots that had clearly never touched mud. He looked up and smiled like he was about to sell me granite countertops. I said, "You got a pipe draining onto my pasture." He tapped a pen against his desk and said, "That's just stormwater." I looked at him. There hasn't been a storm. He smiled again, slower this time. "It's part of future runoff planning." I said, "Who approved dumping it on my land?" He leaned back. "Well, gravity mostly decides direction. I'll give him credit." That line almost impressed me. I said, "You have an easement?" He shrugged. "I don't believe so." I said, "Belief's not much of a legal document." That smile disappeared. He folded his hands. "Mr. Mercer, we're fully compliant." I nodded. Then I left. No yelling. No threats. No point. Because I've learned something living rural most of my life. When somebody talks too smooth while avoiding simple answers, they usually already know what they did. That night, I pulled every document I had. Survey maps. Property boundaries. Old grading notes. County GIS. Then I dug through Brook Hollow planning permits online. Took me 3 hours and 2 cups of coffee. But eventually I found the approved site plans. And there it was. Original drainage design. Underground retention tanks. Multiple runoff capture points. Diversion grading. A proper system. Expensive. Professional. And absolutely not what they'd built. Instead of storing runoff uphill, they'd rerouted discharge to the edge. My edge. Cheaper. Faster. Probably figured no one would notice. Or maybe figured if anyone did, county paperwork would take months. Either way, they bet wrong. Still, I didn't rush. I wanted proof. Real proof. Not just documents and suspicion. 2 days later, the weather handled that for me. Storm rolled in around dinner. Big Tennessee summer thunderstorm. Sky turned dark green. Wind started pushing hard against the porch screens. Then rain. Heavy. Within 40 minutes, I saw it from the kitchen window. Water running downhill faster than I'd ever seen. Not natural runoff. Focused runoff. Like a stream forming out of nowhere. I grabbed my rain jacket and headed outside. That pipe was blasting now. Water pouring out hard enough to carve dirt loose. My pasture turned slick. Mud washed downhill. Fence posts leaned. One section actually shifted while I stood there watching. The ground beneath it giving way inch by inch. And up above me, their neighborhood looked spotless. Street drains clear. Lawns perfect. Every drop headed toward me. That was the exact second I stopped thinking maybe it was a mistake. Because mistakes usually come with panic and apologies. This had planning behind it. I stood in ankle-deep runoff in my own pasture while thunder rolled over the ridge and thought, all right, if this is how they want to play it, fine. By morning I had mud on my boots, standing water halfway across the lower field, and a fence line been enough to need rebuilding. And I also had a phone list. Civil engineer, land surveyor, county environmental compliance. Because if Trevor Klein thought I was going to quietly absorb his drainage bill with a smile, he had badly misunderstood what kind of neighbor he'd moved uphill from. And that was before I built the trench. The next morning started with mud still clinging to my boots and a headache from staring at drainage maps half the night. I called a civil engineer out of Franklin named Dennis Calloway. Older guy, sharp as a nail, voice like gravel. Drove an F-250 that looked like it had survived 3 wars and a tornado. He walked my lower pasture with a clipboard tucked under one arm and stopped at the pipe. Bent down, watched the water, looked uphill, then looked back at me. Well, he said, that's not supposed to be there. I asked, that official enough? He gave me half a smile. Official enough for me. He spent another hour measuring elevation, checking flow direction, marking notes. Then he stood by my fence and said exactly what I already suspected. They concentrated runoff and discharged onto private property without a drainage easement. I asked how long it'd take to force correction. He rubbed his jaw. County? Maybe weeks. Maybe months. Depends how loud everybody gets. I looked at the wet ground. He followed my eyes. Then he said something that changed everything. You are allowed to protect your own land, as long as you don't create unlawful obstruction. That mattered. A lot. Surveyor came next. Then county environmental. Different people. Same answer. The discharge wasn't right. But enforcement takes time. And water doesn't care about paperwork. By that evening I had a plan. Not revenge. Not exactly. Just engineering. A shallow gravel spreader trench cut across my lower boundary. Wide enough to slow concentrated runoff. Sloped carefully so the water dispersed sideways instead of blasting forward. No berm. No retaining wall. Nothing aggressive. Just enough to interrupt velocity. Legal. Documented. Inspected. Dennis helped me mark the line. County signed off. And I rented a mini excavator. Now I'll be honest. I am not graceful on heavy equipment. There's video somewhere on my niece's phone of me nearly dropping a fence post auger into a creek 2 years ago. But by dark that trench was in. Gravel spread clean. Grade checked twice. Everything neat. Everything legal. And Trevor had no idea. Rain came back 2 nights later. Started around midnight. I woke to thunder and sat straight up before I was even fully conscious. Some people wake to alarms. Apparently, I wake to possible drainage violations. I threw on jeans and boots and grabbed a flashlight. The rain hit sideways. Tree limbs bending. Water running everywhere. And then I saw it. Their pipe was blasting. Hard. A white roaring stream punching downhill straight toward my field. Only this time, it hit my trench. And stopped. Not dramatically. No giant splash. No wall of water. Just momentum dying. Flow spreading wide. Calm. Controlled. And because gravity still needed somewhere to go, the water began easing sideways. Then curling. Then backing uphill toward the slope where it originated. Slow. Natural. Beautiful. Like physics had finally decided to join my side. I stood there in the rain watching. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. By sunrise the effects were obvious. My lower pasture? Wet but stable. No washout. No erosion. Fence still standing. Uphill. Different story. Driveways had standing water near the curb lines. Fresh sod looked soft and spongy. A retaining wall behind one corner lot had dark streaks running down the stone. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing damaged beyond repair. But enough. Enough that somebody definitely noticed. My phone rang at 7:12. Trevor. Didn't even say hello. Mr. Mercer, your trench is redirecting runoff onto our lots. I poured coffee, took a sip, and said no, it's managing runoff on my property. Pause. Then sharper. It's affecting homes. I looked out the kitchen window. Your pipe affected my land first. He lowered his voice. We need you to remove that immediately. I said, soon as you remove yours. Silence. Long enough I thought he hung up. Then he said, this can become complicated. And I laughed. Not mean. Not loud. Just genuinely. Trevor, it already is. He hung up. By noon, 2 county inspectors were parked uphill. Yellow rain jackets. Clipboards. Serious faces. Dennis showed up too. I appreciated that. Trevor stood with another guy in a branded windbreaker who looked expensive and unhappy. Everybody waited for the next round of rain. And nature delivered. Right on cue. Water hit. Pipe discharged. Inspectors watched. One guy literally crouched and followed the flow with his eyes from the fence line to my trench to the diverted spread. Then back uphill. Nobody said much. But the questions started. One inspector asked Trevor where the approved retention tanks were. Trevor said construction timelines changed. Inspector asked why concentrated runoff exited through a surface pipe. Trevor blamed grading adjustments. Inspector asked if they had written easement permission for private discharge. Trevor didn't answer fast enough. And silence answers a lot. By late afternoon, Trevor knocked on my porch. First time he'd ever come down personally. Rain jacket soaked. Hair plastered sideways. He looked tired. Not polished anymore. Not smiling. He said, "We'd like to offer fence repair." I said no. He said compensation. I said no. He offered hydroseed and landscaping. I leaned against the porch rail and said, "Grass doesn't stop water." That landed. He looked downhill. Then back at me. "What exactly do you want?" "Fair question." I answered plain. "The pipe comes out." He nodded slowly. "The approved underground retention system gets built." His jaw tightened. "My pasture gets restored exactly how it was." He looked irritated. "And the trench stays." That one he hated. "Why?" I shrugged. "Because apparently I need a backup plan." He stared at me. Rain dripping off the roof between us. Then said, "That's excessive." I looked uphill. At shiny new houses lined up on the ridge. At a pipe they thought nobody would question. Then back at him. No. Excessive was using my land because concrete was cheaper than accountability. He didn't answer. Just turned and walked back uphill. And for a second, I thought maybe he'd fight. Maybe lawyers. Maybe delays. Maybe some endless ugly battle. Then the weather settled it. 48 hours later, another storm rolled through. Harder than the first. Water overwhelmed 2 uphill garages. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to send residents outside in pajamas with wet feet and angry faces. Enough for homeowners to start asking why their brand-new neighborhood suddenly had drainage issues. Enough for people to start demanding answers Trevor couldn't smooth talk away. And that changed the tone real quick. Monday morning I heard engines. Heavy equipment. Excavators climbing the ridge. Trucks hauling pipe. Concrete crews. Survey stakes. A dozen workers moving faster than I'd seen them move in months. Dennis drove by and grinned. "Well," he said, "looks like urgency found the budget." For the first time in weeks, I actually breathed easy. But I still watched. Every single day. Because people move fast when they're embarrassed, and even faster when they're hoping you stop paying attention. I wasn't stopping. Not until that pipe disappeared for good. Not until that pipe disappeared for good. And for a while there, I wasn't sure it actually would. Because if you've ever dealt with developers, contractors, county paperwork, any of that mess, you know how easy it is for people to promise one thing while buying time with another. Everybody starts sounding cooperative the second pressure shows up, but pressure fades, inspections move on, and suddenly what was starting immediately somehow turns into next quarter. I'd seen enough by then not to trust enthusiasm. So every morning I walked the property with coffee in hand. Same route. Past the barn. Down the slope. Across the trench. Up to the fence line. Watching. Listening. Making notes. And little by little, the ridge above me started changing. Excavators dug deep behind the homes. Far deeper than decorative landscaping. Retention tanks finally went in. Massive underground concrete vaults exactly where the county-approved plans had shown months earlier. Drainage lines got rerouted. Catch basins installed. Grades adjusted. Fresh trenches carved along the upper roads. A superintendent I hadn't seen before started overseeing crews. Older guy. No polished sales office smile. Just a yellow hard hat and a clipboard. The kind of man who looked like he actually knew where stormwater goes. One afternoon, he saw me watching from the fence. Walked over. Stuck his hand out. "Name's Rick Hanley." I shook it. He nodded uphill. "Should have been built this way from day one." I said, "That would have saved everybody a headache." He gave a tired laugh. "Headaches are cheaper than lawsuits. Until they aren't." That might have been the most honest thing anyone from that project had said. Over the next week, the white pipe kept shrinking. First disconnected, then cut back. Then finally one Wednesday afternoon a worker pulled the remaining section loose and tossed it in a debris trailer. Simple as that. No ceremony. No apology. Just plastic hitting metal with a sharp hollow bang. And I'm telling you right now, that sound was weirdly satisfying. Like a period at the end of a sentence that had gone on too long. My pasture still needed work. The lower stretch had wash damage. Grass torn up. Soil displaced. Fence posts crooked. But part of the agreement included full restoration. And this time I made sure every detail was written down. Topsoil replacement. Seed. Drainage stabilization. Fence repair. Regrading. No vague language. No handshakes. No we'll take care of it. Everything documented. Trevor came down once during that process. First time I'd seen him since the garage flooding. He looked different. Less polished. Tired around the eyes. Like somebody had finally made him answer hard questions all week. He stood near my porch and said, "I wanted to let you know we're committed to making this right." I leaned on the railing. He glanced at the trench. Then back at me. I still think keeping that there sends the wrong message. That almost made me smile. I said, "Trevor, your pipe sent a message first." He looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. And honestly, that may have been growth. He nodded once, walked back uphill, and that was the last real conversation we ever had. The next storm came 10 days later. Not a sprinkle either. Full-on Tennessee thunderstorm. Dark clouds rolling over the ridge. Wind bending trees. Rain pounding hard enough against the roof to drown out everything else. I stepped onto the porch and watched. Water hit the neighborhood. Ran into catch basins. Moved underground. Fed into the retention system. Then released gradually the way it was supposed to. Controlled. Clean. Predictable. My pasture stayed steady. No erosion. No standing channel. Fence upright. And the trench, my trench, caught almost nothing. Just a little runoff. Exactly how backup systems are supposed to work. I stood there for a while listening to rain and thunder and thinking about how strange the whole thing had been. Because it really wasn't just about water. That was the obvious part. The pipe. The mud. The flooding. But underneath it, it was about assumption. Somebody looked downhill and decided my property was convenient. Decided distance meant silence. Decided 6 quiet acres belonged to the category of easy. And maybe that happens more than people admit. Folks with bigger budgets or louder voices assuming they can lean downhill and let gravity carry the consequences onto someone else. Sometimes literally, sometimes not. Either way, they count on you being too tired or too busy or too polite to push back. And I almost was. That first day at Trevor's office, standing there with brochures and cookies and his perfect smile, part of me did wonder if maybe I should let county paperwork handle it quietly. Wait my turn. Trust the process. But if I'd done that, another storm would have hit. Then another. And every one of them would have carved deeper. So yeah, I protected my land. Legally. Calmly. With paperwork and gravel and patience. And somehow that offended people more than the original pipe ever did. A few homeowners uphill eventually figured out what happened. Most were decent. A couple even apologized, said they had no idea runoff had been routed that way. One older woman named Carol brought over peach cobbler and said, "I guess your trench saved all of us from worse." I told her honestly, probably did. And that was true, because had they kept ignoring it, that whole slope would have become a mess. Foundation moisture. Retaining wall failure. Serious expensive problems. Doing it right cost them. Doing it wrong would have cost everybody more. Funny how that works. Now when I walk the lower field in the evening, the grass is thick again. Fence straight. Tree line quiet. The ridge above looks peaceful. You'd never know a drainage were happen there unless you knew exactly where to look. And if you do know where to look, you'll still see the trench. Neat. Graveled. Running across the edge of my property like a reminder. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just there. Because trust is great. But backup plans are better. And I'll be honest, sometimes I still think about Trevor saying, gravity decides direction. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he thought downhill meant unavoidable. But gravity only works if nobody pushes back. And turns out, water may always look for the easiest path. That doesn't mean it gets to choose yours. If you made it this far, I really want to hear what you think. Was I right to hold my ground and keep the trench even after they fixed everything? Or should I have removed it and moved on? Have you ever had a neighbor, contractor, or developer assume your property was theirs to use because it was easier for them? Drop your story in the comments. And tell me straight, where do you think the line is between protecting what's yours and going too far? And if you enjoy real stories like this about land, conflict, and the kind of justice that takes patience more than shouting, hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because trust me, around here the quiet properties usually hide the wildest stories.